and welcome to Inside Cottonwood. I'm your host, Doug Bartosh, and I'm here today with Chief Jody Fanning from our police department and Marie Carpenter, our manager of our, what are we officially calling our communication center now?
This is the Cottonwood Public Safety Communication Center.
Okay. Okay, and we're going to cover a couple of topics, obviously, around the issue of law enforcement and public safety communication. But what I'd like to do is start off with Chief Fanning. And I know we've been getting a lot of information, and I think our listeners have probably seen it in the paper as well, that or in the media, that heroin's making a big comeback. And as the chair, I think you're still the chair of
Yes.
our Partners Against Narcotics Trafficking, or PANT. Tell us what's going on out there in terms of drug activity.
The drug activity has never receded. It's continued, never stops. We have slowed down the meth flow throughout the United States. The methamphetamines is still out there. It's still being used quite a bit, but not to the epidemic levels that we were seeing 7-8 years ago. But heroin has made its comeback. It's back on the streets. We're seeing more heroin overdoses, more heroin hospital admissions, and just more heroin use. We're starting to see it. Many years ago in my patrol career, very rarely would we run into heroin around here in people's pockets. We're starting to see it in people's pockets there when we're making arrests. And again, we're seeing the heroin overdoses a lot more than we've ever seen. The Oxycontins, the prescription drugs are still a big thing. It's a very big thing. We're still having the robberies and the thefts of the Oxycontins, of the hydrocodones. So those are the things that we're dealing with right now, and at a lot higher levels than we were 5-6 years ago. It's kind of replaced the methamphetamines.
Well, and it's probably gotten a little bit tougher to get the prescription drugs.
Yes, the prescription drugs are getting harder. They're getting more expensive. An interesting note, we've received information that the Mexican cartels have actually ordered a price reduction on heroin so that they can compete with the prescription drugs to keep their drug addicts buying heroin instead of prescription drugs. So they've lowered the price reduction on heroin so that they can keep the heroin addicts addicted to their heroin instead of letting them go to prescription drugs.
Now, it seems I've heard some information that the demographic we're seeing of heroin users is young.
Young, yes, the young heroin users and some of the older heroin users that used it many years ago and then transitioned to the methamphetamines, they're still using it, but the younger ones are beginning to use it now. We're seeing young 21, 22, 23-year-olds that are using heroin, and that's typically where we're getting our overdoses too.
And then in terms of the overdoses, what has our experience been here in Cottonwood or the Verde Valley?
We're experiencing probably 1 to 2 a month here in the Verde Valley in Cottonwood area of overdoses. Some of them end up in actual deaths, and some of them we're able to resuscitate. But we're seeing 1 to 2 overdoses a month in the area from just heroin. And
any idea what's, you know, because even statewide, I know you saw the same email I saw this morning about, I mean, it's gone up like, I don't remember what the percentage was.
Yeah, it went from 80 to 135 in 1 year, heroin overdose deaths in Arizona. And now then the president of the Arizona Chiefs Association has gotten with the local medias of Arizona, and they're going to introduce a campaign to educate people on the effects of heroin and why all these overdoses are occurring. And part of the reason for the overdoses is the fact that the heroin that we are receiving now versus the heroin that we were receiving in the late 80s is much more pure. So our heroin overdosers, they're getting a much pure package, and they inject the same amount thinking that they will get the same high, but it's 3 to 4 times more potent than they anticipated, and then they overdose.
You know, and I'm wondering also if it's kind of the same thing we saw with prescription drugs, where they're mixing alcohol, some other drug.
A lot of times, yes. It's just same thing. We're seeing the heroin, and wherever there's heroin, there's the marijuana, there's the prescription drugs. They're all there. And again, you're exactly right. They sometimes they will have heroin on board with and smoking marijuana, or heroin on board and a couple of Oxycontins, and the body just can't handle those things.
And so, in essence, the physiology of this is it affects your central nervous system, and you get so much on board in terms of that depressant that it just shuts down your
Body just goes to sleep, and just
so you stop breathing.
Yes.
The whole thing.
The whole thing, and then, they can sometimes the paramedics can get there in time, and they can give you I don't remember the Narcan, yes, and resuscitate you. Sometimes they can't.
In fact, I know I was back east recently, and I can't recall exactly who it was I was talking to, but they were talking about supplying police officers with Narcan, because they were the first ones generally on the scene, and I guess the quicker you get that into the system, the more likely it's going to save the person's life. And so this was a city back east, a relatively large city, where they were experiencing a lot of heroin overdoses and deaths. And so consequently they thought, let's get it to the police officers so they can get it on board as rapidly as possible.
Yeah, everybody is seeing, as far back as 2006, we were being told that our next epidemic would be heroin, because of the purity of it and the mass amounts. Most of it's coming from the Middle East, Afghanistan, and stuff like that, and being shipped up over to Mexico and back up through the channels in Mexico. The Mexican cartels purchase it and then bring it up here and sell it. So that's what we're getting.
And that's probably I would think, another reason for the purity.
Yes.
Of their.
Yeah, they're producing so much of it, they don't have to cut it, as we call it, cutting. They don't have to cut it as many times to be able to sell to everybody, because they're getting so much of it at a decent price. They can just funnel it right through. They don't have to cut it up a bunch of times. And that's part of the problem. Is today a heroin user may purchase from you, and the product you have has been cut 3 times, but tomorrow he may purchase the same amount from you, but it's only been cut once. Well, it's triple the power.
Right.
And you don't know, because you're not a pharmacologist, you're not testing the purity of it, you're just selling what you got. And you don't know, so you sell it to him and he's dead. So that's part of the problem that we're seeing, is they don't know the purity of it when they're getting it.
So again, typical forms of how people are ingesting heroin.
Typically, they're injecting it.
They're injecting.
They're just injecting it, and and they can be very creative on where they can inject it, in the arms. There's a litany of places between the toes. I don't know how they do that, because you don't even touch my feet without me crying, but. They are very creative between the fingertips, or in here. They'll inject in here to try to hide the marks, but it's very creative.
And that gives us, I think, a lead into, I don't know if you've been in the dispatch center when you received any of these type of calls, but I'm sure you guys have a protocol as to what you tell people when you get these kind of calls.
Absolutely. We have received a few calls since July 1st, when we went live with fire and EMS dispatching, and the calls are coming in as, she's not breathing, she's not waking up, and we take those down the medical path initially, because that's a medical issue, and the dispatcher has to pick up on other things that are taking place. Some of the background noises we're hearing, the fact the person's only in their 20s and has no history of cardiac problems. So we're sending police on these calls, where before we didn't. Before they're considered just a medical incident, not a medical law enforcement incident. And we just had additional training for the dispatchers yesterday with the fire department on this issue, on the heroin issue, just so the dispatchers are aware that there very well could be a heroin or drug overdose component on these calls. It may not just be a, like I said, medical issue. one of the things that our fire chief, Mike Kirkendall, instructed our dispatchers to be aware of. The reason some of these people are experiencing their reaction they're having is they may have used prescription meds or heroin in the past, and they build up a tolerance to it as well. So then if they quit and come back to it at that same level, they're essentially overdosing on the first time. Again, the purity that Chief Fanning mentioned. But yes, we're experiencing these calls, and we're sending them out, law enforcement and medical as well, to make sure that the police are there to keep the scene safe, because the scene is usually chaotic.
Let's go ahead and take our first break, and then we'll come back and learn a little bit more about what seems to be an emerging epidemic that is really causing some serious concern.
Really? Buzz, what's up, man? You left some leaves burning out here.
Yeah, I just came in just for a second.
Come on, man. If it's too hot to touch, it's too hot to leave. You could torch the whole neighborhood.
It's a good point there, Smokey.
9 out of 10 wildfires are caused by humans.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Welcome back to Inside Cottonwood. I'm your host, Doug Bartosh, and I'm here with Chief Fanning from our police department and Marie Carpenter, our manager of our Public Safety Communication Center. And we're talking about the concerns around heroin and how that's growing. And I know certainly one of the things that brought this to kind of the national stage was the death of the actor, I can't remember his name now, Hoffman.
Yeah. In New York City.
But a very good actor. I mean, Academy Award-winning actor. And in that case, I know he had mixed heroin with something else. And as we talked, that seems to be a major concern too, which is what we saw with prescription drug overdoses as well.
Correct.
Is the synergistic effect between mixing drugs. But I don't think anybody at that point, when he died, really recognized how serious this problem is. But there's definitely seems to be a concerted effort by the Mexican cartels to make heroin the drug of choice in this country.
Yes, they're taking over. The marijuana is still their #1 product and their #1 cash flow. But since we've pretty much eliminated the meth capabilities, and even down in Mexico, it's really hard for them to make meth because of all the restrictions on the red dye and phosphorus and stuff like that. They needed another product to replace it, and cocaine is a big product also, but it's a little bit harder to grow, whereas the poppies are just a native plant and it's growing everywhere. So that's the next thing that they want. They want the hard, and they got the marijuana also. So that's their big issue. And as far as it being a national issue, it's been a national issue for a few years. It's just the public is just now becoming aware of it, similar to the methamphetamines. When we started getting the big name people being seen, the law enforcement, we've been aware of the heroin issue for a couple of years, but the public is just now starting to see it because it's starting to affect people they know, people they see on TV and everything else, and it's becoming more popular, or more I don't know what you'd call it, but more public and everybody's getting on board to say we got to stop this problem.
So, and I think you bring up a good point, is this a reaction by the drug cartels in regards to the beginning of legalization of marijuana in this country. I mean, in essence, does this look like they're just creating another product they can sell? If
I firmly believe so. I believe they are afraid if the United States legalizes marijuana in too many states and we can start growing it here, which I'm not a proponent of, then their cash cow will run out, and they need to have people hooked on something so that they can continue to make their millions and millions of dollars off of us.
Okay. What else are the PANT officers seeing out there on the streets these days?
Still a lot of prescription frauds, still a lot of prescription drugs being stolen, being forged, robberies. We're not seeing too much of the spice stuff anymore. That we've pretty much eliminated that issue. People have gotten educated and have stopped that. But the big thing besides the heroin is still get a little bit of meth, a lot of marijuana. We're dealing with a lot of marijuana transportation now. A lot of companies or people are running under the guise that they are legal transporters of marijuana to dispensaries and stuff like that, and we're finding that most of them are not documented or properly papered, and they're just transporting pounds and pounds of marijuana around that never actually end up at dispensaries. They end up at somebody else's house. We're running into that. But the big thing is the prescriptions and the heroin. Still some meth. LSD's not very big out there. And that's pretty much it right now. That's what they're running with most of the time.
You know, and again, the fact that this demographic that's using heroin is relatively young, predominantly. I mean, what's the advice that you would give parents or friends, family, that they need to look for in terms of someone who may be using heroin?
It's just like any other drug. If you suspect something, in my opinion, if you suspect something, then you need to start paying closer attention, because if they truly are using heroin, I firmly believe it will only be a short time before you will either lose that person or they will be so far gone that you can't truly ever get them back to a state of normalcy. And it's just, you got to pay attention. You suspect it, you see needles, you see syringes, you see bruises on them from little things. I mean, there's all these little things, needles, syringes, the wrap around the arm, cash disappearing, you know, that shouldn't be disappearing, and things like that, lethargic, those type of things. Then you need to start paying attention and watching and get them help as soon as possible, because once they get completely addicted to this stuff, then now they're on the methadone for the rest of their life, which is nothing more than a legalized medical part of heroin, and they've got a rough life ahead of them. But if you intervene soon, you might be able to stop it.
And certainly rehab could be very expensive as well.
Rehab would be very expensive. You can rehab a heroin addict, but it is extremely difficult. Just like a meth addict, it's a very difficult road for them to follow. It's very difficult on the family, because there will be ups and downs. And a lot of times there will be criminal activity involved, so now you have criminal activity along with the illegal drug activity, and it just snowballs on them, and the hole they dig is so deep they can't really ever get out of it.
Okay, let's go ahead and take our next break, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit about our new communication center and how our new I guess new goal of providing public safety communication services for both fire and police is working out. So come back and join us.
So, I'm kind of new here, but I've noticed a trend. My human does this funny thing where she goes around and gets all my toys, and then she hides them in that basket by the door. It's like, hello, that's where you put it last time. You were the worst at hide and go seek.
So, same time next week?
Well, of course.
Welcome back to Inside Cottonwood. I'm your host, Doug Bartosh, here with Marie Carpenter from our Public Safety Communications Center and Chief Jody Fanning from our police department. And we were just talking about, you know, the growing epidemic of heroin use and how that has kind of morphed from, I think, a lot of prescription drug abuse. And we were talking about, you know, how you can protect yourself if you do get prescriptions, legal prescriptions for these drugs, how you can protect yourself, Marie.
You know, we have a lot of citizens who are legally prescribed narcotic pain medication, and it is really important for their own benefit and for the benefit of our public to be very careful where they keep those medications. They need to really be responsible and make sure they're under lock and key, essentially, or they know where they're being kept at all times. In dispatch, we do get calls from the citizens saying, you know, I left my pills in my car. My car was unlocked. And if they're in plain view, you bet those are going to get grabbed so fast. You know, we have people with grandchildren, you know, teenagers, you know, their children. If you leave them out on the counter, it's just asking for somebody to swipe them and grab them. And it's an unfortunate situation for somebody who needs that medication. They have to go back to their doctor, ask for a prescription refill, and doctors are very reluctant to refill these prescriptions.
Yeah, I'm sure they are.
For very good reasons.
Yeah.
And they'll say, you know, you're going to have to go and see the police department and get a theft report. If you left them out in the open in plain view, there's really very little evidence of a crime. And the police department's going to have a very hard time getting you a full, complete report that you can take back to your doctor that will allow for you to get a refill. So I just caution anyone who's legally prescribed medication to be very cautious and keep that under lock and key at all times.
And certainly, if knowing that we've talked about this before on this show, is if you want more information on how to safeguard your prescription drugs, madforce.org, www.madforce.org, and there's some great advice on there. So let's talk about July 1st. Cottonwood took over dispatching our own fire department, along with our police department, Clarkdale Fire, Jerome Fire, and the Verde Valley Ambulance Company. And we anticipate that we may have more agencies that we'll end up dispatching for. So that was kind of a new adventure for our dispatchers to go into dispatching fire and EMS calls. How's it going?
It's going really well. It is. It was a huge transition, and it's not without its glitches anytime you take on a big project, but overall it's gone very smoothly. You know, I've got some dispatchers, they just gravitate towards it, towards fire and EMS and call taking. Our fire departments have been amazing. All the departments that we serve, absolutely amazing. We do monthly training for our dispatchers, and in-service training. They show up from the fire department to participate in the training with us, to, you know, teach us their terminology, teach us little tricks of the trade that we don't get out of the textbook. You know, things that are unique to Cottonwood, unique to Clarkdale, and they've just been so supportive and so helpful, and it's just been a great experience, you know, working closely with our fire departments and our ambulance company.
So I think the challenge for you right now is obviously the facility you're in, because you've had to take on all these additional agencies in the current facility, which wasn't adequate to begin with. But hopefully in the next couple of months you'll be moving into a new facility. What do you see as the difference in, I mean, obviously more space, but you know, how is that going to help you?
Oh, space is the big one, absolutely. And space being an issue because we're in a small center. I've only got 3 consoles right now. One of them's a police console, one's the fire dispatch console, and one's primary call taker. And right now, if the call taker's on the phone with a 911 call and I got to dispatch something out over the radio for the fire department sitting right next to the call taker, I got to kind of turn my head a little bit and kind of shield my mic just because it picks up everything that goes on in that room. So first and foremost, just the quality. What the field units hear, what the callers hear, they're not going to hear all the background noise of the other calls and the radio, and that'll help a lot. Moving over into the new center, we'll actually be able to install our new radio system for the dispatchers. We're using a very outdated, actually end-of-life machine for our radio system. With that, our dispatchers have had to, we have a lot of fixes to make things work. And to make the radio system work, to send out the tones to the fire units, to have the right channel displayed. It's been, we've had to change labels on things, and sometimes we have to use sticky notes to say, okay, this channel equals this, and this channel equals that. So that kind of stuff. And that's just one example. It's the technology, and we just don't have the space to expand any technology. I'm not even sure I could actually plug something into a power outlet because I couldn't find one. We've had to expand with power strips and little UPS boxes, and we just don't have adequate power. Power storms are very scary for us because we could lose a machine or two very easily. And the morale of the dispatchers is excellent. We have a really amazing team of dispatchers. And the resilience of my dispatchers and the staff and the can-do attitude is just what makes me so proud to have this team. But it weighs heavy on them. It wears you out after a while when you have to pull a sticky note out and say, this one goes on this monitor and this one goes on this monitor. We've got 5 monitors and 4 monitors over here, and this person is a call taker, wants to help out because the secondary call taker is the fire dispatcher, and that person gets on 911, and then there's a radio transmission and she or he wants to help out but can't because we have no radio at that position. Those kind of things, it just, like I said, they're so resilient, and the teamwork is amazing, and they step up for each other. It's really exciting to watch. But it wears them out after a while, and a 12-hour shift or an 8-hour shift feels a lot heavier when you're in that environment. So I think we'll see a lot. The service level can only get better. And it's great as it is. So I'm excited about that.
Well, and I imagine it's got to be, you know, because obviously one of the reasons we did this is to make sure that we had better coordination between all our public safety units out there, the police, fire, ambulance, you know, any other public safety response out there is how, so I mean, from your perspective, has that worked better? And maybe you can jump in on this, Chief, because, you know, our fire units used to be on a, you know, kind of a different channel than our police units, and how's that working out?
You know, we had a situation where we needed police to go into the scene first. It was medical as well as law enforcement. It was a suicidal subject. And those types of calls, in the past, we would send our police officers first, then we would call over to fire dispatch in Sedona, request units respond. We'd give them the information we have, but they would have to stage until police made sure the scene was safe for the other responders. They'd get the information, they would stage, then police would be on scene, they'd determine the situation's under control. They would radio into our dispatch, let them know that the scene was safe. We would call over to fire dispatch and let them know that the scene was safe. They would radio over to their units, let them know the scene was safe, and then the fire truck would respond on the scene. And it just seemed like a lot of extra time and energy spent, And we always run into the issue of the telephone game. You know, you start having lots of transmissions and chains in the link of communication. You have lots of points of failure and misinterpretation. You know, just to transpose a number, and it can be a little chaotic that way. So we did have a suicidal subject, and I was really excited about how the call was handled, because a single call taker received the report of this call and was able to enter a call for both police and fire with accurate information. There were just minimal points of failure. And the police dispatcher quickly got the police officers en route. The fire dispatcher quickly got the fire units on scene to stage in a safe location. As soon as the police officer radioed that it was okay for the fire truck to respond into the scene and the ambulance to respond into the scene, it was as simple as a key up on a radio and advise them that the scene was safe, and you didn't have to call another dispatcher, didn't have to relay information. We knew, you know, the story about the scene because, you know, we're right there, and we were able to tell the fire department and the ambulance. We didn't have any lack of information. Nothing was translated. It was a very clean, very well handled incident, and I think the response, the time of the response was much improved, as well as just the overall sense of completion definitely was there.
Additionally, I've seen so far, now that the fire department, we've put one of our police channels in the fire vehicles. I've heard the fire trucks arriving on scenes of accidents, checking with the police officers what best location to put the fire trucks to protect the scene and to still allow traffic flow. Whereas in the past, we couldn't communicate, so the fire trucks would just pull up wherever they thought was the best, which may not have been the best. It could have been better and stuff like that. Now the communication is there, and it's making it much better for the actual boots on the ground to be able to coordinate their actions to make it the safest for the people in the scene and the people around it.
Well, I got to imagine too, just that basic, where previously we took all 911 calls, so even if it was a medical call, we took the call, we had to relay it to Sedona, who dispatch our fire department. So that's got to improve our fire department's response time to what could be a very serious medical kind of issue.
Right, and you know, it just goes full circle with the discussion we had earlier with the heroin. As the primary 911 answering point for the calls in Cottonwood, prior to July 1st, we'd have to sort of pre-screen these calls before just shipping them off to medical. Even though the indication was that it was medical, there was also potentially a law enforcement factor there. You know, the person's unconscious, like we said, you know, could be a heroin issue, could be related to a number of things that also have a law enforcement or scene safety component. So that little bit of screening before shipping the call off, it had a little bit of lag time there. Now it's part of the process, that screening process, it's part of the call taking process for all three agencies to respond to a single incident. And another point I think is really worth mentioning, Code 3 driving. Lights and sirens, you know, a fire truck and an ambulance running lights and sirens, it is a dangerous activity. But you know, they need to get to the scene as quickly as possible based on the information they have. And when we receive multiple calls of what looks to be a very serious car accident, and you know, cars crumple and they look pretty bad, but the occupants might not be very bad off. They could be, you know, fine. Airbags and everything we have as far as safety features. So an officer typically gets on scene and can say, okay, it's not really necessary for engine and an ambulance to run code 3 through town, potentially causing an accident. so that they can radio very quickly and let the engine and ambulance know, you know what, you can probably shut down and drive normal, you know, not put yourself or anybody else at risk.
Life-threatening here.
Right,
yeah.
nothing life-threatening here. Where before it would be a call from the officer to the dispatcher, a ring-down phone call to Sedona Fire Dispatch,
So by
a
the time
relay.
they're
They were usually on scene well before they were
Yeah.
notified that they could actually not drive those extra couple miles with lights and sirens.
Well, we're out of time, so we're going to have to go. But definitely, I think we've talked about this before. I'm going to have you back every now and then. And,
Yeah, I would love to.
And really, you're so much more interesting to talk to than the chief.
I'm okay with that.
I got to give him a hard time. But anyway, thanks for joining us on Inside Cottonwood, and come back and join us again next time.